Really interesting when that coaching carousel first started last season. It would have been surprising, I think, for all of us to say, well, those three coaches don't have jobs, or at least head jobs. Herm, you coached in the league for a long time. Why do you think these three guys were not hired for one of the head coaching openings that was available last season?
Well, sometimes you can stay at a place too long, right? And generally in the National Football League, it goes in trends. And when you think about it now, it's become an offensive league. The quarterback is very important. How you coach offense is very important. But also this, when you sit in that seat, what happens is, as long as Pete Carroll and obviously Bill Belichick sat in their seats, player-coach relationships have changed, right? I mean, 20 years goes by and all of a sudden, you know, the new young players are different than the guys you coached 20 years ago. So it goes in trends. It's been an offensive trend. I know in my era, it was a defensive trend. Lovie Smith, myself, Rod Marinelli, Mike Tomlin, we all came off Tony Dungy's staff in Tampa. It was a defensive trend. So it changes. But the more I look at it now, it's really going to the offensive side. And for the most part, you never get 3 bites of the apple as a head coach. You might get 2, very seldom you get 3.
Interesting. Jeff, what more can you tell us about how these coaches are viewed around the league, knowing jobs will inevitably open up after this season?
Well, I can tell you that there will never be a worse, nor has there been a worse year to be on the hot seat as a head coach, because you are going to have, at the very least, Mike Vrabel and Bill Belichick lurking. Look, I know they didn't get hired last year, but I have found, generally speaking, that owners are a little bit reluctant to quickly give up the type of power that they assumed Belichick and Vrabel would take. But I think over time, they will get more comfortable with the idea of hiring one of these coaches. The other thing that Mike Vrabel has done, which I don't believe to at all be any kind of PR stunt, but it is masterful in showing owners what he's willing to do, he's taken on an assistant role with the Cleveland Browns, and not for money by any means, because he's already making that with the Titans. So that in itself could show ownership that this is a guy who simply wants to coach football. I do believe that he, at the very least, will end up with the job before the end of this year.
Did Jeff say hot seat? You know, like maybe a coach that would like an extension that it isn't getting one at a team, and maybe the owner would like to win now because he's not getting any younger. You know, like a perfect scenario, maybe like the Dallas Cowboys, something like that, who's like, you know, whose name might just always come up as teams maybe struggle in the postseason. If you're looking for a guy that has had success in the postseason, okay. I think Mike Vrabel, to everything that Jeff just said, is the most likely of the three to be back in it. I really do. And a lot of it has to do with what Jeff just said, the willingness to prove that, look, no, I'm young enough and I want to be back in it. But I do think a scenario exists where Bill Belichick becomes very attractive at a couple key places.
It's interesting because age is certainly a factor in this, although I don't want to overstate that. But Belichick and Pete Carroll, both 72 years old. Vrabel's only 48. So we'll continue to keep an eye on that. But either way, I think Jeff made a great point. Not a good time to be on the hot seat next season with these guys waiting in the wings. Anthony Richardson, who's coming off a rookie season that saw some flashes of potential, followed by a season-ending injury. Now, his teammates certainly saw those moments of greatness. You see him out there at camp, too. Looks really good, looks really healthy. Colts Pro Bowl guard Quentin Nelson had this to say about Anthony Richardson on the Bussin' with the Boys podcast. Quote, he was electric when he was in there, and he's an absolute freak. He's weighing in after practice at like 250 pounds. He's ginormous. That's a word. He can launch the ball, and he can be accurate with it, too. The plays that he can make, like some of the ones that you've seen the flashes of, it's like, oh my goodness, this guy's special. I mean, I think that's why the Colts drafted him where they did, Jeff. It was even a small sample size. But what more can you tell us about the Colts' plan for Richardson once training camp begins?
Well, it is expected to be full go for Anthony Richardson. Throughout this offseason, in fact, Richardson felt like he could go without limitations, but the team was trying to be as cautious as possible with that surgically repaired shoulder. And you see that date there, October 24th. They did have a good bit of time toward the end of that season to start that rehab process. They feel like they got a good jump start on it going into the offseason. So Richardson should be ready to go. You see him here going through drills during OTAs. He should be ready to go for training camp as well.
He's kind of been chomping at the bit, too, and they're like, no, slow down a little bit. We need you to be okay for the season. Tim, what do you need to see from Richardson to know that the Colts can compete for the playoffs this year?
Well, he's got to stay healthy. That's the first thing. But I think the other thing is, he's got to show the, growth from a year ago. And I think it's really interesting. I think in some ways you still have to treat him like a rookie. Like I had 2 Gators on the show. Like this guy didn't play a whole lot of football at Florida. And then his rookie season gets cut really short because of that play right there. So I think that, when you look at the amount of football that he's actually played in the last 3 years, it's not a lot. And it's hard to be good at the toughest position in sports when you haven't done it a lot. And so I think it's interesting. I think they want to probably be careful with him because he's coming off of the shoulder injury, not, overwork him and have any setbacks and any of that type of stuff. But at the same time, he needs the work. Now, I think they should be more encouraged, heading into this season than they were last season based on basically what Quentin Nelson was saying in terms of what he did a year ago type of athlete he is. But I think there's still a lot of growth that needs to happen with him.
Yeah, Tim makes some great points in the fact that this guy's a quarterback. And when you have a young guy like this, his problem is he has no time on task. He hasn't played enough football yet, even in college. He only played 4 games last year. So this is one of those deals with a head coach going into the preseason. He calls the offensive linemen in, the starting guys, all those veterans that want to wear their baseball hat and sit on the sideline and not get involved in the preseason. You're going to tell those guys you're going to be involved in the preseason. This guy's going to have to play at least 2 halves of football games in the preseason. I've got to get him live reps, and I've got to protect him. So the starting offensive line, those starting 7 guys are going to play a lot of preseason reps. And if you're one of them linemen, you're kind of encouraged because you want to hear this from the head coach. This young man needs to play football. This is not what we call as we're going to talk about football. No, you actually got to go get on the grass and go play.
Dak Prescott. He was seen in a walking boot, as you see there, on his vacation in Cabo. The poor man can't even vacation. We're taking pictures of him. Plenty of questions surrounding his health after this, but the Cowboys have continued to downplay it. Here's Dak himself on the reason for the boot.
Same ankle, right, that I snapped and had a nasty surgery on 4 years ago. So, a couple of hard days of training, and you get a little sore, and then you're going on a fishing trip, and you want to protect it and make sure that things don't get worse. So, literally, it's absolutely nothing. That's why I said people are reaching, trying to make things that they aren't. I'm getting older, have to take care of my body, have to be smart, and if I can take precautions and lessen it something by putting on a boot, I'm gonna do it. And so, sorry that it caused such a whirlwind.
I mean, Tim, Dak doesn't seem too concerned about the walking boot, but are you concerned that he needed a walking boot to prevent further injury on his surgically repaired ankle on his fishing trip?
I mean, it might get slippery on the boat, Laura. I mean, I don't know. I mean, listen, I actually don't think it's that big of a deal if he's out of the boot and if they expect him to be a full participant. He is right. Like, there is a history with that ankle. Oftentimes, guys need to get things cleaned up because of the wear and tear of a season on something that's been surgically repaired. So, look, I don't think it's an issue. Now, we see him in a boot weeks, 2, 3, 4, that type of thing. I think there's cause for concern, but I actually don't this time of year. And I almost would even say, too, just like listening to Dak talk, he doesn't sound like a guy that's real concerned about how the ankle would affect him.
I agree. When you hear him say it himself, Tim, it makes it kind of like, eh. I just had a fishing accident the other day, too, so I do agree. You got to take all the precautions you can. All right, Dak is one of the players that are awaiting new contracts in Dallas, along with star wide receiver CeeDee Lamb. Look at this. Lamb is hosting his youth football camp today. Tweeted this warning to reporters yesterday, quote, "I'm not speaking about any contract negotiations. If that's your questions, you'll get 0 answers. It's about the kids." So since we can't ask CD about contracts, we'll ask our friend and insider Jeff Darlington. What more can you tell us about the contract decisions there in Dallas, Jeff?
There is no better excuse than just saying it's about the kids, by the way. You can't say anything back to that. It's for the kids. Look, when it comes to CeeDee Lamb, the Dallas Cowboys have definitely behind the scenes made him the priority. Now, whether or not that means that his deal will get done first when we talk about the big three of Dak Prescott and Micah Parsons in addition to Lamb remains to be seen. The question here, of course, is what more answers do the Cowboys need to get this deal done? We've already seen Justin Jefferson get his deal done. Perhaps Jamar Chase can get his deal done and maybe give the answers that the Cowboys need. The question then becomes, are they willing to pay that much? Are they willing to go up to that $35 million number for CeeDee Lamb? Big question still ahead for CeeDee Lamb, but I can at least tell you that these negotiations are ongoing and that CeeDee Lamb is a priority.
Yeah, I can see Jerry wanting to get this done. I mean, he's one of the staples of this offense and one of the best wide receivers in the National Football League. When you think about CD, his ability to catch and run, obviously 135 catches, almost 2,000 yards in reception. So he's a big player for them. But CeeDee Lamb, he has the same problem of all the Cowboys. These guys got to show up in big contests, and we know what that means. That's the playoffs. That has not been the case for this whole football team as of late.
And I think when you look at it too, Coach, you're right, and they do, but they're also going to get paid. And I think that, Dallas has had a little bit of a history of probably waiting too long. It's certainly been the case, when looking at the Dak Prescott situation. And so I think the big thing if you're Dallas is, look, you want to get it done. You don't want, a number one wide receiver completely unhappy, because just look at what happens. Like, look at the Tennessee Titans. They didn't want to do a deal with a number one wide receiver. They moved him to Philadelphia, and now it's affected their passing game for years. When you have a true number one, a guy that is a true number one receiver that can catch over 100 balls a year, a guy that scores touchdowns, like, ultimately it's hard to let those guys leave your building. I think ultimately they should learn by some of the mistakes they've made in terms of how they've handled the Dak Prescott situation.
Yeah, it does seem like they could be aware of some of the mistakes. Oh, go ahead, Herm. What'd you have?
Well, Laura, here's the deal with the Dallas Cowboys. Historically, and I'm aging myself now. I didn't play against this one guy, but Bob Hayes. All right, think about Bob Hayes. Then it was Drew Pearson. Then it was Tony Hill. Right? It's been Dez Bryant. I mean, it continued. They've always had excellent receivers. Yeah. That's the history of the Dallas Cowboys. So they get that part of it. Now they got to get the guy signed.